At the Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies, covering for Jay Fidel and potentially taking over the show. It's my honor to be joined today by Miia Tähtinen. How did I do?
Thank you. Perfect.
Excellent. Okay. From Aalto University in Helskini, Finland. She is a PhD candidate focusing in foresight, and she's actually been visiting us at the Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies. And so we're here today to talk about her research, her impressions of futures in Hawaii, and generally her life, which is a fascinating story. So Miia, thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, John. Nice to be here.
Great.
Really
so
fantastic.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about the futures of wood, natural resources, and obviously we've set the stage, right? We've got a nice forest behind us.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could in general talk a little bit about your research and how that fits into how you see foresight and what is sort of the role of this that you see not only within Finland but then from a global perspective.
Thanks, John. That's a huge question, to be honest.
How about we start with the small stuff and then we can work our way up.
Small stuff. Why don't I start why I actually started on this? Because wood, for me, is the most wonderful material. It's renewable, it's recyclable, it's sustainable, it's carbon zero. It's actually the best of all the materials that you can use in large scale. So this is made of wood. That chair is made of wood. The walls have wooden parts. Wood is used very much in the transportation industry, because on its weight, plywood is stronger than steel. Wood is used, for instance, xylitol that we use in chewing gum is from wood. It's used in the kitchen in gelling agents. It's, well, paper,
Right.
naturally. We have, let's say, newer is, it's in the LCD screens here.
Oh,
As a strengthening agent, yeah. It's microfibril or nanocellulose, as some call it.
Huh.
It's used in car tires as a strengthening agent. Paints, surfaces, basically everywhere.
So wood is everywhere.
Wood is everywhere. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
We've
exactly.
established that wood is a critical resource.
Yes,
So how
yes.
do you see your work and interest in futures related to what is, I found on the way over here, a family history in forestry, right? You're the fourth generation to be involved in forestry and to be concerned about this.
Yeah. Actually, Finland is a very forested country. About 75% of our forest area is forest, and thus forests have been very important. We've had family forest for 6 generations, I think.
Wow.
I guess I'm 4th generation working within forestry. So I do not see a planet without forest resources. Okay, they've been around since the dinosaurs. So the dinosaurs died out, the forest remained, and then humans came along 300 million years later. And what we have been able to do, after the last ice age, there was about 6 billion hectares of forest, and now there's 4.
Wow.
So we are stronger than one big meteor that killed the dinosaurs.
We've been very busy as a species, right?
Yeah, so I've been able to, for my work, I've been able to travel to a lot of areas. I've been living in China and Siberia and Africa when I was younger. And then I've been traveling on top of that. So it's traveling is my hobby.
Right.
And of course, I look at forest resources from a also professional point of view. And I just see such a big discrepancy about what we talk about the future all the time, what's going to happen, you read in the papers how things are going to go, and then what I see around the world. That it just put me on a path of reading more about it, and the more I read about it, the more fascinating it became, and that's why I'm here.
Right, and that seems to be one of the critical questions. Is there a future? I mean, considering how we use wood and how wood gets appropriated and the ubiquity of it in all these things, are we on a sustainable path? And so a lot of your research calls into question those practices and looks at possible alternatives. So what is then, and let's not talk about the future, what are futures of wood, right? And what brought you then to Hawaii?
So very, very good questions. So basically, first, forests are going to be here. They are vital for the planet, but they can survive without people. We cannot survive without them. So we have let's say, about 1 billion people out of the 7 on the planet rely entirely on forest for everyday use. So without wood from the forest, they cannot cook their food, they cannot heat their houses or warm their houses, and they cannot have light in the night. So it's vital. About 9% of all energy used on the planet every year is from wood, only 9. But 85% of all Africa uses wood only.
Wow. Wow.
So it's for a certain part of the population on the planet, it's vital.
Right.
There's actually 350 million people, just about the population of the US, a little bit more, that live entirely out of forest. They need it for their life.
Right.
So if we disappear the forest, they'll basically be without means of supporting themselves. But it's not only that. You know how trees grow, right? So everybody knows trees grow. So what happens is trees take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and use the solar radiation from the sun to produce carbon, which is the wood.
Right.
And they produce also oxygen and water. So without forests, we would have trouble breathing. Okay, most of the oxygen is produced in the oceans, but still, still, it wouldn't be fun. Then areas that we managed to totally deforest have trouble retaining the soil. So basically, we need trees to have to combat soil erosion, to help fight floods, to basically keep our planet together.
Right, and they tend to be the key indicator of ecosystem health. So if you want to find out if an ecosystem is thriving or working, you typically will look to the trees, right?
Exactly.
And look to them as the centerpiece of what is then a vibrant ecology.
Yeah,
right?
because they are the dinosaurs of the plant kingdom. They are the big ones. And so we need trees, very clearly. But then again, we have this duality of a problem where we have we need it for use because it's basically the only renewable material we have. If we use metals or if we use plastics, we are using non-renewable, very bad for the environment materials. And then again, we need the forests for the people and for the planet. So it's an interesting question how to do. There's a lot of discussion around sustainability and the biodiversity in plantation forest. You probably have heard about it.
Yep.
But that's a question of comparing apples and oranges, because you compare plantation and a natural forest when you actually should compare a plantation and a coal mine, or a plantation and a cobalt operation.
Right.
So we are not talking about the same things at all.
Right, because in the plantation you have essentially monoculture, right? And a focus on a singular species or crop, whereas obviously in a natural environment you have the diversity, right, that grows out of the system, right, in a complex system. So I'm wondering if you could maybe identify some of the few trends or emerging issues that you see that could really shape the future of wood and natural resource use, specifically that are affecting, let's say, not just Finland, but that might be global issues. So what are sort of the things that you have on your radar related to wood, and then wood as a natural resource, but also as a commodity?
It's actually, now it's a good time to take those 4 futures that you discussed last time into play. So Dr. Data has this wonderful framework of 4 futures. You have the continued economic growth, collapse, discipline, and transformation. So all of our models and the way we live our lives is based on continued economic growth. And that is what's been placing our forest into danger. The kind of unfortunate thing about it is that our forests are in danger entirely not from the industrial side. So out of all the forests that's harvested every year, around 60% is used for energy, for cooking, or for slash and burn agriculture.
Right.
And the rest is used for industrial. And out of the deforestation, we lose around 5 million hectares every year. 5 million hectares is the size of Costa Rica or Slovakia. So it's like one country every year.
Wow.
That's almost entirely due to bad practices by people who have no choice. So it's a really difficult situation because we are demonizing wood use when we should not be demonizing use of a renewable material. Right. But at the same time, real way to stop deforestation is to stop poverty. And that unfortunately has been a harder goal to achieve. So we are kind of in a catch-22 there. So that's one thing that's all the time on the agenda, is deforestation. It is such a bad out of the trio of land use,
right.
Cement and energy produced greenhouse gases on the planet. In the last report by IPCC, just below 10% is from land use change, and then 90% is cement production and energy production. So obviously forests are an important player, but if 90% is cement and energy, if you can reduce that
right.
by having sustainable forestry, that would of course be a way to kill two birds with one stone, or how do you say it?
Right. So it sounds like some of the critical issues in forestry link to other massive geopolitical, social, environmental issues.
Of course.
It's a finger in the crack of the dam approach, right? You put your finger here and it's going to come at you from some other way. I know that because I sort of have a background in religion and teach that as well, there have been creative responses. So for example, in Thailand, a number of monks got together, and they're called the ecology monks, and they created a new ritual where they would ordain a tree as a monk, and no self-respecting Thai would get in the bulldozer and take out the monk tree. So they were actually able to preserve large parts of the forest, right? What have you seen as some of the innovative responses to move towards greater sustainability with wood resources, or other things that are happening to try to correct what is obviously a global systemic issue? Are there initiatives that you see that speak to this problem indirectly, or what have you come across in your research that maybe could provide some solutions to what is clearly a pressing global issue?
That's actually a very, that's an excellent example. There are small grassroots movements everywhere. And then there is, of course, this large smear campaign against the use of wood in general, which is kind of, it's not helping the real problem, because you should still use wood as opposed to any other material.
Right.
So what's happening is there's a lot of research done into forests themselves, into growing wood out of less materials, just as there is a lot of research being done to animals being able to reduce their food consumption and so on and so forth, because we have only a limited amount of land on the planet, we have only a limited amount of resources. So if we can get more out of less, that's, I think, where we are all.
Yeah, that seems to be the critical issue, right? How do we take what we have and then make it sustainable? So I want to hear more about this. We have to take a quick break. So I'm John Sweeney. This is Finding Our Future. We're joined by Miia Tähtinen. Did I get it right?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll be right back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidel, founder of ThinkTech Hawaii. We are a digital media nonprofit that covers things that matter to tech, energy, diversification, globalism, and progress for our state, the state of Hawaii. We broadcast on community television and on Oceanic Cable Channel 16. We also stream our shows and interviews live on the internet as both radio and video, and of course we post them here on YouTube. We collaborate with the Hawaii Venture Capital Association to present monthly luncheon programs on subjects of interest to the business community. And we write for the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. ThinkTech works hard to raise public awareness in Hawaii. Check out our website, thinktechhawaii.com, and come to our YouTube channel, ThinkTech Hawaii. We hope you support our mission and that you like our work. I'm Jay Fidel. Mahalo.
Aloha, we're back, we're live. I'm John Sweeney, host of Finding Our Futures, and I've added the S on the end in honor of future studies. And I'm joined by Miia Tähtinen, a PhD student at Aalto University in Helsinki, Finland. And we were just talking about some possible responses to wood sustainability, and so some of these solutions. And so you were saying there's a bit of a smear campaign against the use of wood, right?
Yeah.
So is that born out of the same systemic conditions that are creating the poverty that necessitate people using wood? Or what sort of do you think driving that push clearly to question the use of wood for what seems to be sustenance, right? You were saying that there...
No, there's actually, the real problem is poverty, okay? And what we are seeing more of is making people guilty about buying wood products, like buying magazines or buying books, instead of using something that's online. And the carbon footprint of anything you have online is way bigger.
Sure.
So using a library book is clearly the most ecological choice, even though it's a very old technology. The thing is that a lot of the people who promote reducing the use of wood are people who are able to make lifestyle choices where they actually reduce consumption entirely, whereas a lot of us are not able to reduce consumption.
Right. So it becomes a class issue, right? That's something, it comes up in sustainability, right?
Yeah.
Who's able to afford organic and natural, and these sorts of questions become prescient because...
Yeah, but it's even that the people who say that it's bad to use are people who do not use. So if you use the most sustainable raw material you have. And to solve the problem, you would need to solve global poverty. So the best countries from a forestry point of view are countries who've been able to save a large portion of their natural forest. In New Zealand, about 30% of their forest is entirely closed off for use, commercial use, and it's just natural forest. It's also Pacific culture, and forests are very important there, so they were able to save, and regrow, because forests grow back.
Right.
So if you just leave them alone, they'll grow back after a
Slowly,
certain time.
but they grow back.
But it's one of the biggest exporters of wood for commercial use.
New Zealand?
Yes,
Really?
they have
Interesting.
huge plantations. It takes 7 years for a tree to be that big, or 30 years for it to be this. So they've done the right thing for their geographic location. And if you could do that everywhere, that would be absolutely perfect. So they've been able to have they are monocultures, yes, but it is also being able to save part of real forest for people to use for recreational use. And as there are holy places, there are forest non-wood products such as mushrooms and berries and everything that you want to get out of forest in that area that's preserved. And then the rest of the land you just use as well as you can to ensure that you can have sustainably long-term lots of wood coming out of this, like from a field.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
So what you do want to do with any area, like a field, you want to use it as long as you can, keep it fallow or put proper nutrients back into the soil to ensure that you can do that generation after generation. You can do that with forestry. So we've been doing that for over 150 years in Finland, and now from the same plot of land that used to produce about 1 cubic meter, we can get 5. With almost no, not that much additional nutrients. So it's just selective breeding and good forestry practices. And I see that as a very ecological way to be.
Right.
So you would save what you have and then maximize use somewhere else.
Right. So given the conditions that we have currently, clearly we could be doing different things to maximize efficiency and find more efficacious ways for production. Climate change tends to throw a wrench in these sorts of things. So how do you see climate change disrupting, breaking those trends? And then are people thinking, at least in as you see the field broadly of wood and wood as a natural resource, are they thinking about these issues, and what exactly are they doing to prepare for what many people think are going to be dramatic changes?
That's a very good question, because now we are, so with this economic growth, we are in this area where we use wood continuously for industrial purposes as well as everything else. No matter how far I calculated all of these scenarios, I always came up with, by mid-century, ending in collapse. There's just not enough material on the planet to feed everybody. Because now we have about 10% of the world's population is rich. And we are at 1.5 planets. So if 100% is rich, we are at 15 planets, right? And we don't have 15 planets. So regardless of how many times I calculated, regardless of how I tried to redo this, I always ended up in a collapse.
Right. That's very similar to the limits of growth, right? The Club of Rome in the early 1970s projected particular population growth, and that we would in fact be living. And yet, we seem to have been able to string together the sort of systemic conditions whereby we can sustain and obviously have global population growth in excess of what many people had expected.
Oh, what?
So how do you manage the expectations of collapse, which are very clearly plausible, with some of the improbability that we've been able to make a go of it? And obviously it affects different people in different ways, right? We're talking about differential changes.
That's true.
So how do you see this playing out in, let's say, Finland versus New Zealand versus the US?
The example, New Zealand and Finland, they are actually disciplined societies where forest use is well within sustainable limits, where Finland has the largest forest area that's been preserved as national parks and I'd say virgin forests out of any country in Europe. And we still manage to have a rather sizable forest industry.
Right.
So that's a disciplined society where we find ways of making it work within the framework we have. So we have certain amount of resources and we use them sustainably. But the way I see it actually is that all these three futures are happening simultaneously. So I see it as a little girl blowing a soap bubble or a chewing gum. And then inside this chewing gum you have individuals, companies, societies, countries that collapse, that grow, that are disciplined. But because everything is bound by these, so you can call them planetary boundaries, or you can call it a soap bubble or whatever. It means if somebody is to have, somebody needs to give. The ones that are self-contained, they are the sustainable or disciplined societies. There are technologies, such as recycling, which actually momentarily makes the bubble bigger.
Right.
Right? If we didn't recycle about 90% of all the metals used globally, out of the metals used globally, 90% are recycled, not the other way around, we would obviously have already burst the bubble. But because we recycle so much,
right,
70% of all paper is recovered, and almost all newspaper that you read nowadays is from recovered paper. So it's the bubble is just bigger.
Right.
But it's still a bubble.
So is it a Band-Aid on a broken leg? Do you see that through efficiency measures, through sustainability initiatives, that we'll be able to curtail what is clearly this endemic growth sort of perspectivism? Because one thing I often hear and we talk about in sustainability is it's always after the fact. So we think critically about what is it precisely we're trying to sustain, right? And your point about needing multiple planets for certain lifestyles points to the fact that it is a differential equation, right? Some people have to forego other things, right? And so obviously a lot of the international accords have broken down specifically related to questions of growth, right? Wanting to follow a certain trajectory or a certain model and not being able to. So are there any international measures that you see are in place, or is it far more localized in paying attention to these resources? Is there anyone stepping back and at a global scale saying, look, this is a resource that we need not only to sustain our lives, but since we seem to be headed towards the sixth major extinction event in Earth history, and we seem to be driving that.
We are in the middle of it.
Right. So how do we find a way to, at a broader governance level, is there the potentiality for that? Is that what you see as part of this move to a preferable future?
That's a very good question, actually. Both the US and the EU have now legislation in place that requires all wood products that come into these areas to be from known sources. So it's to combat illegal logging, which is one of the worst reasons for deforestation. So if they work, it means that basically wood will get more expensive for us because we will only get it from good sources. And that would be good because it means the consumer will pay the real price.
Right.
And there is awareness, understanding on all levels of the situation and the problem. But the people who are desperate, who are poor, who have a field, who they can farm for 1 year, half a year, then because of soil erosion, it's going to be useless the next year, so they need to go to the next forest, and they need to go to the next forest. They are the ones, it's impossible to find a humanitarian way to help there unless we help the people on the ground.
Right.
So it doesn't matter how many times we understand it on a global level. It is the people on the actually about between 1 and 2 billion people that we need to help.
So are there NGOs, are there organizations doing that kind of work?
There are NGOs doing, the best work is done in helping them, for instance, come up with agroforestry, where you plant a few trees within the fields that can help in soil retention, and also give shield and help in growing the crops. So you can do both of that. That helps. But a lot of the times the real problem is not addressed.
Right.
It's like the fringe problem is addressed.
Sure.
It's no use trying to affect the consumption part when the real biggest issues are somewhere else.
Right. That's interesting. So we've talked a lot about energy, a lot about the sort of geopolitical utilization of wood and wood resources. I wanted to hear a little bit what you had to say about food. I only mention that because my favorite time of year in Oahu is mango season. And there are all these amazing mango trees all over Kaimuki and Diamond Head. And yet repeatedly, I see tons of mangoes on the ground.
Yeah.
So oftentimes you look at the way that these are thought about or not thought about as actually valuable resources, right? And so I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you see that relating to, again, not just as a resource for materials, but as a potential food source, right? And the kinds of maybe differences, but also the similarities that are used for fruiting trees versus the more material approach.
Like orchards.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's actually, Hawaii is an incredibly lucky island. There are not that many areas on the planet where you can have fresh mangoes. So, fully agree. It's every time I pass a mango tree, it's
You have to come back in May. It's pretty amazing.
No, but they are well utilized in areas where people honestly do not have a choice. It's a choice of either eating the mango when it comes out or starving. The problem is that very often after the year, you need that small plot of land. There are people who fell the trees and plant something else there. So poverty doesn't give you a chance for long-term planning. And that's, I think, is one of the biggest problems. So there are areas where actually around big pulp mills in Latin America, you might not think of a pulp mill as being in any way sustainable, but the NGOs and the local people and well-behaving companies have been able to come up with a system where local farmers get seedlings and some fertilizers, and they can plant among their area enough eucalyptus trees or some other commercially required trees. And that gives them, first of all, enough wind and sun shield, but also an additional income on top of what they can make out of their land. So they get their food out of the land, and then they get a small income out of selling the wood without having an additional too much of an additional cost. And that's helped increase forest area around pulp mills, where in areas with pure agriculture it's actually decreasing.
Interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that's fascinating. It sounds like the perfect appropriation of futures thinking, which is what I want to talk to you. We're going to take a quick break. I'm John Sweeney, host of Finding Our Futures. This is Miia Tähtinen, PhD candidate at Aalto University in Helsinki, Finland. This is ThinkTech Live, and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Steve Petranek, editor of Hawaii Business Magazine, and I'm going to be part of Newsmorphosis 3, a look at online news in Hawaii. And along with me there will be Patty Epler of Civil Beat and HuffPost Hawaii, Malia Zimmerman of Hawaii Reporter, Jared Kuroiwa of KHON, and moderating us all is Howard Dykes of Hawaii News Now. If you want to know how Hawaii it gets its news now and will be getting it in the future, you need to be at Newsmorphosis 3. That's at 11:30 on October 24th at the Plaza Club. See you then.
Aloha, we are back at Finding Our Futures. I'm John Sweeney, ThinkTech Live, joined by Miia Tähtinen, a PhD candidate at Aalto University in Helsinki, Finland. And we've been talking a lot about wood resources, natural resources, and futures. As I want to get a little bit back to thinking about futures and some of the things you mentioned, but also the reason you came here. So you came specifically to study with Jim Dater, to be at the Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies. And so just off the top of your head, impressions. What do you think?
It's been wonderful. I'm an engineer originally, so it's been fascinating me with poli-sci people, and having the wonderful discussions that I've been having here have been almost as wonderful as the nature in this beautiful country or beautiful island. But I think the reason that I came here is because Dr. Data introduced this concept of 4 futures, and he was very clear that he preferred qualitative research over quantitative. And I find that fascinating because in an engineer country we tend to like numbers, and we will tend to like something we call hard evidence and so on and so
Right.
forth. But about futures, I think the stories that we see, the trends that we feel are, and the things that you can think of or somebody else can think of are all equally important. And therefore, I found this framework to be so useful for putting my own thoughts into order. As I was telling you about the bubble gum,
Right.
and the 3 futures happening simultaneously in different areas. It's actually, they are happening now, not
Yep.
just in the future. They have been societies in the past that have perished because of their unsustainable practices. They have been societies that have flourished. And then there have been societies like, as far as I understand, Hawaii was one example, have been able to find a balance within that system where they can feed, clothe, and have people happy within the boundaries of the island. And because now for all of us actually to have toilet paper, we have to remember that there's almost 1 billion people on the planet without toilet paper. When we imagine that all of these people will have their first chair, their first bed, their first door, we are well beyond 5 planets. So the reason that we have been able to have such a long time of economic growth is because societies have collapsed inside these planetary boundaries.
Right.
They have collapsed ecologically, socially, economically, just in one or the other way. For somebody to win, somebody has had to lose.
Right.
So the only way to get outside this bubble is through transformation, is through a technology or a way of thinking that is so new and so outside the planetary boundaries, or able to use them in an entirely new way, that we can escape from our, in a way, bubble prison. And I've been playing with the idea that we could use photosynthesis, which is what the trees do, to create energy, because they use solar energy and carbon dioxide, and the whole problem with this climate change is carbon dioxide, basically, or that and other greenhouse gases. But what if we were able to use that instead of having to hide it by carbon capture and storage, or trying to play with the planet in another way? How about using the very stuff of life?
Right.
Doing what is by far more advanced technology than anything humans have ever come up with. Photosynthesis. We are not able to do it at the moment. A few oil companies have been working with algae, but it hasn't been as easy to put as you.
Right.
So
The technology is still in development, and then you get into issues related to scaling production, right, and how we find a way to diffuse the technology. But there has been a shift, from what I hear you saying, is towards biomimicry. So looking to nature, finding natural models,
Yes.
and adapting our technology, adapting
yeah.
our society to that.
yeah, like these super strong robes or Superman suits, or the different things that you can do just by studying the way nature has already figured this problem out. And photosynthesis, there's been an analysis or a guess, basically, best guess, that photosynthesis creates as much energy every year on the planet as 1/6 of the one, so 6 times more than we consume. So it's already there. If we were able to copy it,
Right.
we would be able to solve all our energy problems, and with enough energy.
Right.
I mean, wood is living oil. There is nothing that can be done out of the petrochemical, meaning there's no chemical, no plastic that cannot be made from wood. And because it's living, carbon chains are unlike oil or gas. Who knows what we can make out of it? So I think the research on the use of wood is just starting to walk out of the crib, so to say. We've done way too little research into it. It's a fascinating nanocell machinery. The whole way wood works, how it grows, how it adjusts to different conditions. we don't know what kind of medicines or what kind of products you could actually get from wood. So all that is that's been getting better lately, a lot better. So there's a lot of research and money put into the chemical aspect of.
Right. So then the question becomes, do we have enough time? And you were saying earlier that there is the expectation, based on all the information, that collapse seems imminent. And yet, there's also the potentiality, right, with the futures. There's always the possible that through radical technological change, or obviously a variety of societal changes in practice, belief, value, structure, that we could potentially escape that. So if you had to, let's say, give the top 3 things that you could say that would work us towards that preferable future, what would that be? And again, it can be at a global scale or regional scale, but what would be the top 3 things that you think we could do today that would help move us towards that better space?
That better space. Well, of course, if it were up to me, I would put lots of money, a lot more money into research on photosynthesis and wood-based chemicals. But on a very practical level, there are small solar panels that have been used throughout Africa now to, instead of having a motor pump, or you'd have a solar panel powered pump to water the fields and to give light, heat and possibility for cooking. Every single one of those stoves does more for the planet than your change in many consumer habits. Of course, changing consumer habits, I'd like people to use libraries more. It seems like a really stupid thing, but it is.
Right. Certainly in America, people could take in their children. Right? Absolutely.
I'm a bad example myself,
Right.
having an ebook, but an ebook is better than an iPad. It uses much less energy. Just as normal being smart about things you do. Those are the simple things, basically.
Right.
I go for a run. I live in Palolo Valley at the moment. I used to live in Manoa for some time, and now I have a stay in Palolo. I go for a run, and I also, like you said, I notice trees. There's a papaya tree in one garden where there were 8 fruit last time I checked. 2 are already desiccated and so dry. 2 are rotten. 4 were perfect. And I looked at them so hungrily. And 2 were growing, but nobody wants them.
Right.
And that for me is just such a waste. So,
Right.
so just being smart about the way we live and use the good things, that's I think the easiest answers. But they will definitely not help us with this imminent collapse. It's not imminent per se. I mean, all the projections are based on lots of leeway. But in reality, we are already at a 1.5 planet of renewable resources. So that is the Earth biocapacity in fields, like food fields, in forestry, in fisheries, and the ability of the Earth to take all the trash that we produce. So it's not even taking into account all the non-renewable materials.
Right.
And if we are now at 1.5, it honestly means that when I say that we are losing 5 million hectares a year, that's part of this. And we are losing biodiversity at an increasing rate. We don't know what we are losing. We could be losing the cure to cancer and HIV and everything just this second, and we just don't know it.
Right.
So most of the rainforests have not yet been, we don't know what's there.
Okay, so I want to come back to this. We have to take another break.
Okay.
I'm John Sweeney, Finding Our Futures, joined by Miia Tähtinen, PhD candidate at Aalto University in Helsinki, Finland. And we are on ThinkTech Live. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
Aloha. I'm Nicole Horry for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Aloha and welcome back to Finding Our Futures. I'm John Sweeney, joined by Miia Tähtinen, PhD candidate at Aalto University in Helsinki, Finland, and we are on ThinkTech Live. This is the home stretch, so stick with us. We'll hit some of the big questions. We've saved the good stuff for last, I think. So I think that from my perspective, broadly speaking, sustainability and the move to a more ecological mindset raises critical existential issues, in part because there's tend to be two ways of thinking. One is that humans are somehow unnatural and we need to get back into the natural swing of things.
Yeah.
The other is that we're part of nature, which is to say, like, we are the product and result of this worlding as it's gone on. And just as coral build giant reefs, we build New York City, right? Which can be great and affirming, but also can naturalize so much of the destruction that we tend to sort of, like just rot on the environment and the biosphere. So how do you see, or what strategies do you think would be valuable for getting at what are deep-seated value and worldview issues? I mean, we talk about behavioral changes or systemic, but at the end of the day, you're changing hearts and minds, so to speak. So are there models for that? Are there ways in your research that you see to engage people that maybe could, and I mean, not to use a poor analogy, but wake the dead, right? We seem to be stuck in this model. So how do we get people off of this sort of growth train and thinking about other possibilities?
That's actually a wonderful question and a good way towards the end of our talk.
Well, I only ask because I don't have the answer, so I'm hoping you'll be able to share that.
I don't, but since I came here, I learned of a wonderful Hawaiian concept called ola, which is all life. Well, if it may ola, it would be all life easier, but ola. So all life, and that to me is, that's a word we lack. So the first thing we should do is put that word into the English dictionary and Finnish dictionary and all the dictionaries on the planet, so that we would always remember that we are part of nature. The nature can survive without us again, but we cannot survive without nature, and at least not as human beings. And therefore, by diminishing that, we diminish ourselves. We diminish our possibilities to live. And I think the fact that there's a word for it gives you a totally different mindset and the ability to think that, I'm actually hurting myself, not just something else. So I think that would be a wonderful way to get started. And even if I'd learned nothing else, that would have been enough for me to come here.
Right. It's so often the case that when people come here, it's the culture and the space of identity and culture here that informs so much of what is done at UH, but then also I think futures in general, which employs a multi-generational perspective, right? And you find so many indigenous communities, so many native peoples having that already, and clearly there's wisdom there to be harvested, right, to be mined. The trick is finding a way, again, of not just changing hearts and minds, but actual practices, right, actual structures.
In Finland we have very strict forestry legislation, so you may not harm your own forest. It might belong to you, but the view is that it belongs to the next generations, and you may not harm it. Because it takes 150 years for a tree to grow in Finland. It takes 20 years in New Zealand and 150 years. So if somebody harms their forest now, it's next 2 generations or 3 generations who will suffer. And the maximum penalty for harming your own forest is 2 years in prison.
Wow.
So that's not very often the case, of course, but that's the starting point. And what it means is that all forest owners, which is there's 850,000 of those, almost 1 million out of a country of 5 million, so a lot. Many people own forests in small amounts, of course, but own forest anyway, and they get support, they get information, teaching, they get seminars, they get forest trips, they get support if they want to increase yield out of their forest, so they get monetary support for some of the works done. And then after they've sold some of the wood, and they are given clear instructions on how to continue. So it's a really multi-generational project. To make a forest better in Finnish latitudes takes hundreds of years, and we've been doing that now for almost 200 years. And it doesn't mean that you have to wait until times are really good to make the changes, because the forest legislation was put in force in Finland not very long after the worst famine we had 30% of people died from hunger. So you would think that in a situation like that, you would just think that everything fails. Let's increase food production. But people were wise enough to realize that if we cut away all the forests for food, we will end up even worse off in another generation or two.
Right.
So we were lucky, very, very lucky, to have tough weather and wise leaders when they mattered, in a time when there was no democracy, so to say, because everybody was more or less living off the land in slash and burn. So this is the long-term thinking that needs to be put in place. So anything related to the earth should have that kind of long-term thinking. And for instance, China, which is not known for its, unfortunately, they've been very good with dealing with the ecological disasters in the past years, but they have had the biggest replantation project of history of mankind, 1 million hectares every year for the past 15 years. So in '98 they had a very big flood on the Yangtze River. It was disastrous, absolutely disastrous. And one of the reasons was because the riparian areas, the areas around the river, had been cut clear. So they started this massive, massive plantation project where they planted around all the big rivers, and then up north in the Gobi Desert, trying to act as wind shields and erosion shields. So it's massive plantation project. The forest cover went from 12-13% to current 22-23 in just this time. So it's possible to do it, but it requires massive amounts of legislation, forcing, money, manpower, and I don't really see us all being very smart about changing the way we live and look at life. So maybe we need more regulation that's helping on a really long-term thinking.
Back to the discipline model, right? We can think about and plan out, and then, as Data is apt to say, surf the tsunamis as they come, right? And find our way to navigating change. So I wanted to get back to the China example, and you've spent a number of years there living and working. So China is often seen as being the driver into the futures for growth. So could you just very quickly talk about where you see China heading based on your experience, and then how you see China fitting into what some very clearly see as a very tense political economy, sort of globally, right? That obviously with issues in the US related to the debt ceiling and concerns about political gridlock, how do you see China fitting into the sort of international order and the model, in part because China obviously has had lots of concerns internally about human rights and other sorts of concerns, even though they've liberalized certain areas. So that's a lot to drop on you, I realize, but the sort of your impressions about China for the futures.
Yeah, that's a really good question. But all these questions that we are talking about in the Western world, whether it's Europe or Finland or the US, they are we have to remember that all of our thinking is after the war. All of our well-being is after the war. Europe it was basically raised during the war. So we started from nothing and then grew into this incredibly wealthy area that we are living at the moment. I'm not as well aware of anything related to the US naturally, so I'll have to take your word for everything. But it's been fantastic for me since I started following China in 97, and it's been fantastic to be able to follow the growth of a country from what it was then to what it is now. I traveled a lot in the countryside, and I'd go there after a year, and all of a sudden there would be asphalt roads and plumbing and electricity lines, and the whole basically a mud hut village would be changed into a city or town. So in a year. And it was just mind-boggling to follow the rate of change. And I've enjoyed hugely reading all the Finnish newspapers that tell first they told every day that it's this is just momentary and it will stop. And then it will stop. It will stop. So it's been now stopping for, what's that, 16, 17 years? And I haven't seen the end of it yet.
Right.
And the same in forest industry. Every year the industry experts say that now development in China it's stopped, and now it's going to move somewhere else. It doubles almost every year.
But there's no stop. Right.
I have not seen a stop, and they are already at 40% of the global industry, forest industry. And I think they will be at 50-60% in another 3 years. So
Wow, so keep growing. Well, unfortunately, we have to stop.
Okay.
We're out of time, but I wanted to thank Miia Tähtinen,
Thank
PhD
you.
candidate from Aalto University of Helsinki, Finland, for joining us. I'm John Sweeney, filling in for Jay Fidel, Finding Our Futures. This is ThinkTech Live. Join us next time, and have a great day.
thank you. Mahalo.